Hey guys, so today I'm going to be talking to you guys about iOS UI automation and specifically using Xcode and XCTest. I'm not going to go into the kind of depths of how XCTest works or some of the kind of cool stuff that you can do with Xcode. Really, this is just to give you a basic introduction into writing UI tests for iOS apps. Okay, let's get started. So what is Xcode? Well, Xcode is just the IDE that comes with macOS. Well, it doesn't come with macOS. You need to get it from the App Store. But yeah, Apple provide this for developing and testing iOS apps. You probably, well, I would advise to use it, mainly because Apple are the ones who kind of hold all the keys. They are the gatekeepers really with iOS development and testing. There are kind of other tools out there. For example, you can use Appium with like, some Selenium in order to do UI automation on an iOS app. But soon as Apple push out an update, then because Appium is a third-party thing, it immediately becomes out of date. Whereas when they push an update out, they tend to do another update for Xcode to go with it. So you're always up to date. So what does Xcode give us? So Xcode will give us a suite of tools for, as I said, iOS app development and testing. We're up to Xcode 10 now, so it's been around for quite a while, and for the most part it works out the box, which is nice. So what about XCTest? So XCTest is a framework that Apple provide, and it comes with Xcode, comes built in. It was introduced in Xcode 5, so kind of like Xcode, it's been around for quite a while now. It uses Objective-C and Swift. Nobody likes Objective-C because that doesn't really get used anymore. And everybody, develops iOS apps with Swift now. That's the kind of go-to language for that. But there still is kind of classes and various other files that are kind of Objective-C related for the dependencies and various other things. So what does XCTest provide us with? Well, because it's the kind of main testing framework for iOS apps, we can do unit testing with it, performance testing, and in particular UI testing, which obviously I'm going to be talking about today. So what is XUI-test? Well, this is basically the unofficial name for the UI testing part of XCTest. If you go on Google and you search for XCUI-test, there is a lot of content out there on places like Stack Overflow and any other kind of forums. But if you were to go to the Apple Docs site, you wouldn't find XCUI tests written anywhere, and yeah, that's why it's kind of like the unofficial name for it. So let's have a look at how XCTest and the kind of UI part of it is constructed, or a basic look at it anyway. So these are kind of some of the main classes that, or key classes that we need to consider. At the kind of highest, or sort of a high level, we have an XCUI element class and an XCUI element query class. Now these two are very important because these kind of form the basis of how we interact with our application, but also how we kind of select elements on the page and perform the various actions that we want to do in our tests. An XUI element. So I suppose what's the difference between an XUI element and an XUI element query? So an XUI element is basically what you get if you evaluate an XUI element query. How it does it, you don't really need to know this, mainly because what XCTest provides is some like pre-rolled queries, which we can see here with these stack texts and buttons and text fields, and there's various other ones for different type of elements, different types of elements that you can get within an application. Things like tables, for example. Another one of these kind of pre-rolled queries, I guess, is this XUI application. It's down as a class, but really, like it's just a query that gets evaluated. And this is a very key. This is probably one of the most important ones, because this is our entry point into the application. So whenever we want to perform any query, really, we need to use this XUI application as, like as I said, our kind of entry point to the application. And there's a few others as well. So we have XUI screen, which is kind of separate to all of this. So far, I've not really needed to use it, apart from maybe like the odd instance. But it's worth noting that it exists. You also have these XCT assert classes. Sorry, not classes, functions. And there's various kind of variations of this. This one obviously is XCT assert, but there is, for example, XCT assert true or assert false. I think there's one for XCT assert match. And you'll be using these a lot when you do your UI tests. Cool. So let's have a look at what XCTest sees when we load up an application. So here what we have is what's called the accessibility hierarchy, and this is what XCTest uses in order to identify elements on a particular page in an app. So this app at the side here, this is an app which I've taken from the internet, and I think the kind of principle of it is that you stick in how much coffee you would like, and then a coffee to water ratio, and then it will give you back the amount of water that you need. Bit of an odd thing to stick in an app, but yeah, whatever. And then I guess there's this timer at the bottom as well, which I suppose you could use for brewing your coffee, maybe, or tea, or whatever. It's not the best app in the world, to be honest. I mean, it's not that fleshed out, and there's a few little kind of quirks in it which I found. But we're going to use it for our dummy app in order to play around with and write some UI tests for. And I'll leave a link to it in the description for this particular app. When we run a test with XCTest, this is what it sees, it's just a hierarchy of what's on the page, similar to the source code on a web page, for example. So here we can see that there is this segmented control with a couple of buttons in it, which is this thing up here. we have a static text element, which is where it says coffee here. Got some text field elements and some static texts and some buttons. And those pre-rolled queries that we saw before are kind of tied to these, and that's how we would get a reference to these elements. There's a few other things as well where they have this this other type for elements which don't quite kind of fit into that, I guess. And for example, here we have stuff to do with like the battery and this like Wi-Fi signal stuff at the top. You're probably not going to look at that, but kind of it's worth noting that this is here. So these identifiers on elements, I've actually gone into the app and added these identifiers. So this is something that you will need to watch out for when doing UI tests. Because if they don't have an ID on the element, then I'll probably question why isn't there an ID on the element. Because obviously we want to write applications which are testable. So let's have a look at an example of how we can do this. So I have Xcode up and running here, and also a simulator. So Xcode provides a bunch of simulators packaged in with it. If we go into this little drop down at the top, we can see this is called a scheme, and then if we hover over it, we can see a list of iOS simulators that Xcode provides. You can install like different iOS versions if you so desired, but kind of out of the box, this is what it provides. And if you plugged in your own device, you plugged in your own iPhone, then what you can do is running an app is the exact same process, and you'd see it up in this little menu up here. You click on it, and then you'd hit this play button here to run the app. So if I go into here, I'm going to run it on the XR. I mean, it's already installed, but for example, let's say it wasn't installed, then just hit play, and Xcode will build the app and launch it. Yeah, I mean, we can play around with it if we click in here. Then you can stick in some values. Do this. Give us a nice water value here. Start the timer. All good stuff, isn't it? So let's just close off the app, and then we can get started with some UI tests. So in here, I've created a directory called tests. You can have your own structure if you'd like. I find it easier if we kind of separate out things out. But we'll get on to helpers and page objects in a bit. But for now, we'll just stick in tests. So we go into here. We go new file. I'm going to create a Swift file. We'll call this coffee ratio tests. And we can just get rid of all this for now. So the first thing we want to do is we want to import XCTest, and then we can create our test class, coffee ratio tests. This class has to inherit from an XCTest case, and this basically just highlights to XCTest that this is a test class. And also, I suppose it gives some extra, like some setup in the background, which you don't really see. But yeah, I can go into it later in a separate video. It's quite kind of hidden away, that a lot of their stuff they don't actually mention in their docs. So there's been a lot of for me to learn how XCTest does things. I've done a lot of guesswork, really. So let's start with our first test. So we do front test, and and we're just going to call this example coffee calculation. So as I said before, a key class in XCTest is the XCUI application class, because that is, as I said, our entry point into the application. So whenever we make a query, we're going to want to do XCUI application, and if we do this, then there's this is kind of the starting point to kind of any query that we want to make. So what we want to do is we're just going to do launch, so this will launch the app, and then from then onwards we can start to enter stuff into the app or the fields. So what's the first thing we want to do? We're going to enter our coffee total. So let's do XCUI application. We saw, if I load up the app, just uses annotation. So we're going to click into this field here, and then we'll type something in. So this field is a text field. So from this point we can do text fields, and this is kind of like syntactic sugar for like evaluating a query. This like pre-roll query stuff. You don't really need to know kind of how these queries are formed, but just you can use these pre-rolled ones. So text fields. The ID for this particular element is coffee total input. Then we can do the action of tapping it. So once we've tapped it, we are going to want to stick in some values. So let's just copy this just because I'm lazy. So we've got this ID here, and then we're going to go type text. So what do we want to stick in here? Let's stick in 10. Next up, we are going to select the water ratio. So we've got XCUI application, another text field. So we're going to select this element over here. So text fields. What's the ID on this one? ID on this one is water ratio input. So we're going to tap this. And then we're probably going to want it to clear this field as well, because if we just tap in here and then we start typing, it's just going to add things to the end of it, which isn't really what we want to do. So if we come in here, we can tap this, and then this will bring up this kind of native menu. So this native menu, these elements have their own kind of predefined IDs on them. So what we can do, we can just go clear the field at this point. Let's see what application. So what do we need to do? We need to tap this. We tap this field once again. Again, I'm just going to be lazy. So we tap that. That'll bring up this menu. Then we can do menu items. Select all. So we tap that. That selects all of that. That brings up this menu here. To which then we actually want to click this delete button. So this delete button is another kind of similar one with its own ID. So we can do application again, keys, delete, and we can do So there we go, we've deleted that, and then finally we can do enter water ratio. Do application, text fields, water ratio input, and we can then begin to type some text. So let's stick in 20 for this. And then I suppose the final step would be to assert the correct calculation. Oops. Calculation. So as I said earlier, we have those XCT assert functions, which we can make use of here. So let's say we want our expected to equal 200, and our actual, we're going to get the text value out of this. So I'll type in this. We're going to do 10. What did we do? We typed in no, we typed in 20 in here. So we're going to extract this this label to be 200. So this is a static text element. ID on this one is watergrams label. And we're going to get what's called the label, which is basically just the value of that text field. And then finally, we can use that XCT assert. I want to use XCT assert equal for this one. We're just going to say that the expected value is equal to the actual value. Cool. Okay, so let's try and run this. So XCTest will pick up that this is an XCTest case, as we saw before, and then it uses functions that have, I think, test underscore at the front to recognize that this is a standalone test. And we'll see that we've got this little play button here, which we can press, and it should just roll through this test. So there we go, it's launched the app. It's come in here, typed in value, tapped in there, deleted that, and excellent. Everything seems to be hunky-dory with that one. So you're probably thinking, I mean, if you didn't have this, my trusty voice, or you didn't have this lovely presentation which had all the IDs there, how do you actually find this hierarchy? Well, if we stick a breakpoint into, for example, there, I mean, it doesn't have to be there. Let's say if we do a debug statement, just put a print in there of just, that's something, then we can put a breakpoint on that one. And let's run this again. So let's assume that we don't have any of these IDs. So it's going to launch the app. We are going to hit this breakpoint, and then at this point we can start to put in some queries into the console down here. One of the things that XCUI application provides is a calculated value it's called a debug description. So we can do print out, and if, at this point we can just start to put in queries. I'm going to use the print query at this point just because it kind of prettifies it. If you don't, yeah, the formatting is a bit rubbish on this one. So we can do XCUI application, and then we have debug description, run this, and you get that hierarchy that we were seeing before. So I'll just enlarge this just so you guys can see. Yeah, we can see what elements XCTest can see. And then we can take those IDs and kind of go from there. This is a good kind of starting point. Obviously, you guys would need to make sure that these IDs had been added onto the elements. So you could also kind of step into the code of the application and find them that way. Yeah, it's kind of worth noting that this is here. Something that's probably worth mentioning at this point, actually. So if you go into a lot of the tutorials on the internet, what a lot of them will tell you to do is use this trusty record button down here. And what this does is we can click this, and then start to kind of click around, and yeah, it's rubbish. It's already broken. We start tapping that, then it'll start to generate the test code for you, but it's just not very good, really. It's maybe a good kind of like basic starting point for you to maybe query different elements, but you're much better off just writing your own test code, because I've been scarred by like the likes of Dreamweaver, for example, when you'd create a web page and it would have a line breaking every other line. It was just terrible, and this is no different. The code that it generates isn't very good. It does get you a test that might work, but as soon as you change the format of your page, then it doesn't work, and it's not very good. So just something to be aware of. So we're gonna stop this. So yeah, there's our first kind of basic test, but we can clean this up a little bit, and in the next video I will show you how.